Welcome,
Um,
Arnold fans. Welcome to the Arnold Podcast. I am with Doug Greenberg of Rocky Minute, and I am Sicco Heersink of A Mel Gibson Podcast. We come here for one thing and one thing only, to talk Arnold. Doug, you've watched Pumping Iron, probably, I assume, as much as I have. Let's get into it.
Pumping Iron is one of those. I said it before we started the show that you can't understand where the man has been unless you understand where he started. Now, I love the subject of bodybuilding and the stuff that these guys go through to build their bodies into the chiseled stone statues of, ancient Rome.
Yeah, so how old were you when you started working out?
I was like right about the end of my high school age. So 1996, let's say. So I was never like too serious about it. I was
So
more
you came
of
in late.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And even in the years of weightlifting, I would get some little impingement here and then take off a couple of months and then I'd start lifting again. And it just, I wasn't as dedicated about it as someone, say, of your background.
Right. So when did you become aware of Arnold? Was that around 18 or later?
Oh my God. No.
Because usually that goes hand in hand.
I was a big fan of Arnold's action movies when I was a kid.
Interesting.
So much
You
earlier.
knew him as the actor before you knew him as the bodybuilder.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
I
And
am
it was
exactly
probably
the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Him as a bodybuilder first.
I started working out when I was like 9 or 10, with just calisthenic stuff and stuff from martial arts. And then I got into free weights when I was 12. I was aware of who Arnold was in bodybuilding terms because I had run across the Pumping Iron book, which is the book that actually preceded this documentary, because the writers of that book are also the guys involved with the documentary. I remember the Rolling Stone article. There's this famous Rolling Stone article on Arnold when he was Mr. Olympia. And he had like really famous photos with Annie Leibovitz, who was a huge photographer back in the 70s and 80s, basically art, what she produces. And she was one of the major contributors to Rolling Stones in terms of images. And she shot like these indelible images of Arnold. And that's actually when I first saw poster, because in Europe, the Pumping Iron movie was marketed with the Annie Leibovitz pictures, where you see Arnold smoking and you see like this, you see him looking at the camera through this haze of smoke in a red t-shirt. So I was aware of that. And I think everybody who starts working out immediately becomes aware of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's exactly what he wanted. When Arnold was king and Arnold started marketing himself, I have to become iconic. Whenever somebody touches a barbell, they must think of me.
Yeah, and that sure
in
carried
many ways,
on.
when you watch Pumping Iron, that's where it's already starting, this myth building around Arnold, this legendary bodybuilding figure.
Yeah, I guess I just wasn't as inserted into the weightlifting, community at that point. It wasn't until my maybe right at the beginning of my 20s when I realized what a force Arnold actually was in the bodybuilding community. I mean, I always, you knew of him as like a Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia, whatever the biggest Mr. Olympia is ahead of Mr. Universe, right? Like that's the one for all the marbles.
That's what they also explain in Pumping Iron. You have all these different federations, and you have people who have won Mr. Universe multiple times. So they come up with this concept where only Mr. Universes could enter this particular contest. You could not enter unless you were Mr. Universe. So that would decide who was the best.
For sure. He proved himself worthy 6 times in a row.
6 times in a row, and he made a comeback in 1980 and finagled himself into a 7th win. Now, there have been people who have won more Olympias, but to be fair, most people regard Arnold as the greatest bodybuilder of all time, even though there are people with better bodies, bigger bodies, but nobody ever had his package.
like I've seen this movie a bunch of times, but I never really understood what went into bodybuilding until I actually sat down and like paid attention to the voiceovers and stuff when they talk about proportion and muscle symmetry and everything.
Yes.
And you can
They're
see
human art.
we'll get to it, but there's a couple of scenes where I think it was Ken Waller that was criticizing Mike Katz's physique and saying that, you know, his arms are too small for his chest, or you know, we'll get into it later, but that I didn't realize that little minute nuances like that can cost you
the higher you get, the higher level it becomes in a competition, the more these little tiny details become huge details.
Right.
Even the shape of the day, whereas one guy would hold a little water so you can't see his muscle definition, that could be a factor in whether he's placed higher or lower. I mean, those tiny details become huge problems to those guys on the day. Pumping Iron was a book. It featured Arnold. They came up with this concept. Well, we'll turn it into a documentary. The problem is the people who they wanted to make the documentary with, like Arnold and Lou Ferrigno, they had retired because there was no money in bodybuilding. I mean, nothing. You couldn't earn your living with that. So they went into other things. And Arnold had won the Olympia 5 times, and he was tired of it. He wanted to get into acting. And the screenplay for the book Pumping Iron had been adapted first into a novel and then into a movie screenplay called Stay Hungry. And Arnold had been cast as the lead. So he was looking to get into acting, and he was retired from bodybuilding, and they had to talk him into doing another Olympia. It's like, no, we're not going to have a movie unless you compete in South Africa. Mm-hmm. So he had lost a ton of weight for Stay Hungry because the director of Stay Hungry, Raffleson, had said, look, I need you at 210 pounds. So I need you to, otherwise you look too big on screen. And so Arnold had lost a ton of muscle weight. And then he had like 3 or 4 months to just put it back on again to win the Olympia, which is interesting. That's why the physique of Arnold from 1974 to 1975 is so radically different. Because in 1974, he's at his biggest, and he defeated Lou Ferrigno, who was humongous at that point. And if you look at the pictures, you see the tremendous difference between the two competitions. Whereas because of all the dieting he's done that year, 1975 is much harder. Yeah, because Lou had retired as well, and because Lou was a sheet metal worker in New York, and he lived with his parents in Brooklyn, and he was out of bodybuilding, and they basically called him up and said, look, we'll pay you to be in this documentary. We'll pay you to train, and we'll pay you to be in the documentary to compete. And then he was like, well, okay, maybe I can have another go at it, because he'd already been Mr. Universe twice, Mr. America twice. So there's really nothing for him to do except try to beat Arnold, and Arnold had defeated him. So there's really no point.
Right. That's the bodybuilding pinnacle, being Arnold for Mr. Olympia.
And Arnold was unbeatable.
When you're talking about Arnold having to get into, you know, show shape, going from 74 to 75, was it?
Yeah.
How much, I mean, it doesn't take much. Once you achieve that, it's muscle memory will allow you to pack on the muscle. I mean, I'm sure with the aid of a pharmaceutical or two,
it was the 70s.
You'll be able to put on muscle relatively easily once you've achieved that.
Yes, that, and Arnold was taking layoffs every year as well, because he worked in construction. He went to school during the rest of the year, so he would only train 4 or 5 months before competition, schedule all his
stuff like the magazine covers and whatnot.
Everything, they would schedule that around the competition, and so he would only be in shape for maybe a month or two.
And another thing I found really interesting was the amount of time that they put towards posing, the practicing posing. I mean, we could jump right into the opening scene, how they have a ballet dancer, him and Franco Colombo, a ballet dancer, showing them how the body flows and the right way to do certain poses. So the body looks
the
more
art
aesthetic.
of posing. That's right. Yes, it's a little contrived because I doubt Arnold in reality worked with a ballet dancer to improve his posing, to be honest. But it does show on what level bodybuilding is in terms of physical display, in terms of presenting physical art. If you look at ballet, that's kind of the pinnacle. That's human movement in art form. Mm-hmm. And so you have a ballet dancer putting the finishing touches on what Arnold does.
Well, it's more than
you can tell from the scene that she does know what they're doing, which is very interesting.
Because it wasn't as much the pose itself. It was transitioning between poses that the body should flow into the next pose instead of, doing something that's too herky-jerky or not aesthetically pleasing.
And she talks about the eye line, that you should always be, you create a line and you should always be looking in that line and the movement should flow. And she's talking about on what leg you place your weight and how you shift that weight within the movement. I've been in 23, 24 competitions. And so I've done a lot of posing and free posing routines. You don't think of it in terms as shifting your weight for a ballet display. You think of it in terms of shifting your weights to keep your balance so you can flex every muscle possible, but also to lean into your leg in a certain way so it'll look better.
Yeah. It's the artistry of the poses was, to me, what I found most interesting.
Yes, and that's a dramatic difference between ballet, because they're not worried about the muscular display as much. They're more worried about the beauty of the and serenity of the movement. So, and that, it's an interesting setup, because they're basically setting up bodybuilding as it's not just a sport, it's an art form. They keep harping on it the entire movie. Because Arnold keeps explaining, no, it's I'm like a human statue, and if I want to increase my deltoids, an artist could just slap on some clay, and I have to exercise to make that deltoid bigger. So
that was one of my favorite quotes. When he said that about how like an artist could just slap on some clay and sculpt it, but I have to put the time in the gym to increase my deltoids.
Yeah, and so here you have Arnold, this Austrian. When you think about it, awkward man with this awkward name, with this weird accent, and he's in California of all places, and that appears to be really the center of the bodybuilding world. It is to this day, in fact.
Jim.
Yes, and so if you look at the opening credits, you see the bodybuilders of yesteryear, and you see people like Eugene Sandow, who was kind of the most admired strongman of the 1910s and 1920s. He would do all these amazing feats of strength. He was one of the first strongmen to ever be filmed, and he was really, really, really famous and popular. And most of that strongman thing was a really European thing. You would have German strongmen, and they would have competitions, and out of that kind of grew bodybuilding. And that mostly in the 30s and 40s, when you would just have guys who would compare the size of their arms, and competitions kind of grew out of that. And
also, I noticed too that we were talking about the artistry of posing, and there was hardly any artistry in that. It was, I know that the film is just the method of filming. It was filmed at a higher rate. So it looked kind of just herky-jerky, but
and the styles were different too, because back then the posing routines wouldn't be done to music. If there would be any music, it would probably be an orchestra. They would do a kind of calisthenics routine, and they would do strength feats. You see a little bit of, because you see Franco Columbo in the opening credits, you see him blowing up a hot water bottle. That's the kind of things they would do to prove their strength. They would do a routine that was called muscle spinning, where you just flex all your muscles in a certain way and you make them kind of flex and roll.
Right. Like
back then, people really didn't know what they were looking at. So the sophistication came later. Mm-hmm. Another really interesting thing is that you see images of Charles Atlas, and everybody only knows him from the cartoon in the back of magazines, or really the ad with the cartoon where they sell his workout routine, Dynamic Tension, where if you get sand kicked in your face, you can do this workout routine, come back to the beach and get the girl, and use that ad for decades. And it sold. I mean, he was really one of the most famous guys out there. This movie is one of the few times you actually see the real Charles Atlas pose.
I mean, all those strong men had their gimmicks on how to sell their product. Joe Weider, Jack LaLanne, it was all, you could achieve these results if you buy this product. You know what I mean? And like, you could come back to the beach and get the girl with a different physique that's right up their alley.
Yeah. Arnold, same thing. He had his mail order business, one of the biggest ones. In fact, he was the first bodybuilder to actually need a secretary to make sure everything got out properly.
Yeah.
And he was earning top dollar even back in the 70s. In fact, the book he did, the second book, or third book, I think, is the Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding. Those are based on all his courses. Because he has this big encyclopedia. It's like 2 or 3 inches thick, and it has every exercise imaginable.
So he was never starving.
He never had a day job. He never worked. He worked out.
Well, good for him. I mean,
that's what I think one of the things we should be exploring in this podcast, where how much of Arnold's bodybuilding career prepared him for being the best paid entertainer in the richest entertainment system, Hollywood, in the world. How much of the traits we later come to admire in him in his movies were all honed in his bodybuilding days.
Well, we could see it right from here, the charisma that he has, but also like injecting himself into the LA scene definitely helped. I mean, if he was bodybuilding in, Arkansas, like
Austria,
we would never
stayed in Austria.
Yeah, we would never know who he was. So going to LA was a move number one.
Yeah,
and then
essential.
Just being the biggest guy in the city also helped.
Yeah, so really, the main question should be: could Arnold's launch into the movie business have gone any better?
I don't think so, because he was just being as big as he was. There's nobody on film like him. So if you wanted a robotic looking bad guy, if you want a big muscular hero, if you want, to show a guy in a loincloth in the woods talking to animals, you know what I mean? Like you had all of that wrapped up in Arnold. And he did it perfectly.
The opening of really one of the opening scenes of Pumping Iron, we see Arnold coming back from his layoff, and he's coming back into the gym. And so there's this small guy compared to Arnold, because he's huge, jump into his arms. And then we get to see one of the real basic traits Arnold has. The first thing he says is, "You're a sick guy." And he doesn't say it in a nice way, does he? He just sort of kind of berates him. There's this guy who's like, hasn't seen Arnold in months, and he's happy, and he jumps into his arms because there's cameras there, and that's a cute thing to do. And Arnold, who obviously doesn't want to be portrayed in that way, immediately asserts himself as the dominant alpha male, as the king of that gym, and just say, "You're a sick guy." That's good to see.
He's abrasive. He kind of ridicules guys who are smaller than him.
Yeah. He doesn't like the little guys.
He comes off in a playful way, though.
He has this mixture of charisma and cruelty.
It's like, when you tussle the hair of a little kid after you tease him and then like send him on his way, you know what I mean? That's kind of what he does to all these people.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, it's like a jerk move. It's like a dick move, but I mean, he does it in a playful way, but so it seems like he's not being a jerk. I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, he's the cool quarterback in school.
Yeah.
Okay, a guy you want to be friends with, but who sort of intimidates you, and he can just mess with you whenever he wants.
Yeah,
You're at his mercy.
One of the things I loved about seeing him in Golds in the beginning here is, like, we know Arnold as the action star, the physique that he presents on camera, but I loved seeing him fine tuning it and working on it, seeing him do like the grunts and the weightlifting faces, seeing him like he's putting the work in.
The first 10-15 minutes of Pumping Iron is just basically introducing Arnold, introducing the sport. And you have this voiceover where he talks about the pump. which is, I think, one of my favorite things in this movie, where he just Arnold pontificating about his version of bodybuilding, where it's like the world according to Arnold. It's like, yes, the pump, it's the most satisfying feeling you can get in the gym, and it's this and that and the other. Like, really, Arnold, really. Yeah. And later on in Pumping Iron, he just compares it to having an orgasm. It's like, oh yeah, I have an orgasm day and night, because I can have the pump anytime I want.
Like a constant, like not unending orgasm.
Exactly.
But it's more of him just pontificating about bodybuilding. It's weightlifting. I mean, you lift weights and I lift weights, so we know the feeling of the pump, like where it feels like your skin is about to rip, because because you stress that muscle group so much that it feels like it's going to pop out of your skin.
Yeah.
And he's not wrong about the pump and the feeling you get from it. I wouldn't compare it to having a 18-hour orgasm.
What was your first pump like?
Oh my God. I thought, I remember the early days. It didn't take much to get the pump.
No.
But when you think like you feel strong in your first couple of reps, and then all of a sudden the fatigue starts to set in.
Yeah.
Then
when the lactic acid starts to build up.
Yes. After your ATP, your adenosine triphosphate is all depleted. Then after you work that muscle group, you look back at the weights, you're like, I didn't even push that much weight, but I feel amazing. And that's what, like, it took me a while to realize, like, it's not about the amount of weight that you push. It's the stress that you put your muscles under. And you can do that with light weight.
Definitely.
So, and that's like my early pumps. I'm like, wow, I am, when I could barely lift my arm, I'm like, all right, I guess there's something to this.
Yeah. I visibly remember, I can see it in my head. The first time I got the pump, I freaked out. I just got a plastic dumbbell filled with concrete. It was about, I want to say, by American standards, about 5 kilos, which is like 12, 13 pounds. So I was doing curls with that, because that's the first thing you do. You get a dumbbell, you do a curl. So I was doing curls, and this was, I was like 10. I started doing reps, and I did a bunch of them, and then my arm started feeling numb and weird. So I let it go, and I looked at my forearm, and it was swelling, and I freaked out, because before that I didn't have any capillaries. I didn't have any veins. And my forearm veins started popping out and coming up, and I was looking at them, and I freaked out. Yeah, I was looking at my forearm, and it was swelling, and those veins were popping out, and I was like, oh, is this normal? Do I need to go to a hospital? What's going on? And I had kind of that sensation Arnold talks about, where it gets so tight, it feels like someone blew air into the muscle. That's exactly how it felt. It felt completely immobilized, and I was like hooked on that from then on. That was it for me in martial arts. I was into weights. This was it. This was what I wanted to do. To an extent, that's the same thing that happened to Arnold. I mean, he was into soccer, and he was into all kinds of other stuff. And he just sort of went to the gym by accident, because his coach was like, well, we'll try that and see if you guys can get a little bit more muscle. And he worked out, and he went nuts. It was so bad, he couldn't walk home.
Leg days, man.
And those are the things you remember. And it's like, that separates the wheat from the chaff, because the guys who really want it, they come back.
Oh yeah.
That's the difference. And that's what Arnold talks about in the movie, about pain barriers. It's like, yes, if you want to be a champion, you have to go through pain. And if you can go through the barrier, you make it to be a champion. If you can't go through, well, maybe you should play basketball or checkers.
Well, the pain is enough for a lot of people to quit.
Yeah. And it's not really pain, is it? It's discomfort. It's just physical discomfort. Burning your arm is pain with fire. Working out is just physical discomfort.
Right. And it ends, and then you have the results to show for it.
And you get that nice endorphin rush, and you know what those results are going to be. Part of the joy of working out is knowing when you've done something that'll give results, that actually build muscle. You know when that happens. And it's part of the joy.
Which
like
takes
knowing
years.
You're going to be better tomorrow. We see Arnold guest posing at a prison. He was, like I said, a pioneer in many ways. He did a lot of guest posing on battleships, on in prisons, and that really wasn't done back in the day.
Yeah, that
Whereas
surprised me.
working out in jail is like something that's taken for granted now, but back then it wasn't. Arnold kind of pioneered that. So basically, everybody who's getting ripped in jail
Has Arnold to
thank
thank.
Arnold. He built.
Well, when
the
you're in
market.
jail, you have nothing else to do to pass the time except lift.
Yeah. Do
As long
push-ups
as
in
they,
your cell for 23 hours.
yeah. I mean, you don't even need, a whole weight set. You could do body weight stuff.
Yeah. Well, the thing with prison is always like, where do you get your protein?
Right.
You don't get that much food, do you? So what, do you trade cigarettes for protein or something? How does it work?
I don't, I mean, you can kind of, it's easier, I guess, with the lack of protein to sculpt what you have rather than build. I don't know if anybody's going in a thin rail and coming out as a monster.
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? But I hear a lot of stories about the guys coming out with more tattoos and more muscle. So,
Oh, maybe they're just revealing the muscle they already have.
yeah, the scene Arnold does at the prison is just fascinating. I mean, he controls that group. I mean, these are hardened criminals.
Right.
We're not a terminal island. We're talking guys who are there for life or waiting for the chair. And that's California is what injection.
At this time, everything's lethal injection. There is no more electric chair.
No, okay. Well,
sad to say.
Still one of the better Stephen King movies. Anywho.
Oh yeah.
But Arnold, he heard about those guys in there. I mean, the balls of him saying that, it's like, okay, so here you are in front of a group who've all murdered people or done really heinous things. And so one guy just gives him lip. It's like, hey, how about giving me a kiss? And he goes, hey, I heard about those guys in here.
Yeah.
And everybody's laughing with him.
He makes gay prison rape jokes.
Yeah. And this is Arnold selling movie tickets right there. This is a guy who has an audience with hardcore criminals.
And
is
has them eating out of the palm of his hand.
Look at it for what it is.
Incredible.
Yeah, and they actually earned enough money so they could just, Arnold and Franco would do that, and they would just earn enough money so they could just train all summer for competitions, which is probably one of the reasons they were number one and number two, because all those other guys would, have to go to whatever menial labor job or teaching job they had. And Arnold and Franco would have, the convenience of just, we work out and then we eat and then we sleep on the beach and then we bang a few beach bunnies and then we work out again, rinse, repeat. And they would do that all summer, all because they could do those guest posing things.
Really, the only thing separating them two was about 8 inches, right? In height.
Yeah.
Because they, as far as physique is concerned, they were pretty neck and neck.
Yeah, and don't discount Franco Colombo, because Franco Colombo was really the alpha male of the two. He was the stronger one, mentally the stronger one, the more mature one. I mean, don't forget, Franco Colombo was the boxing champion of Italy.
Yeah.
And he wasn't a joke. People look at him as, it's a small guy. No, seriously, Franco, even in Pumping Iron, he's kind of like, well, that whole psyching thing where they sort of suggest Arnold is this mentally superior person. Not with Franco. Definitely not. Definitely, Franco's one of those like cool, calm, collected, quiet guys.
Right. I guess he didn't have like the brash charisma that Arnold had.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the only thing he was lacking.
Yeah, because there's this one scene where they're working out on what's called Muscle Beach, which is the outdoor gym.
Have you ever been?
Yeah, I've been. Yes.
Nice.
Of course.
I figured you would have.
I had to. Yeah, no, and I worked out there because it's kind of a pilgrimage thing. I think if you
for sure.
If you're competitive, at some point you compete in the United States, and your main thing in mind is I have to get to the Gold's Gym, I have to get to World Gym, I have to find out where Arnold trained, I have to be there. I have to walk, kind of like if you're a Rocky fan, you run the Rocky steps.
Right. Yeah. It's
Same
your rite of passage.
Those people are your heroes, and you mold yourself after them to an extent. The same with Rocky. You want to walk in his footsteps, imagined or not.
Right.
Same here. So you see Arnold and Franco working out, and they're bench pressing. Arnold is counting in German. At one point, he just mumbles, "Ja, och, das ist genug für heute." And basically, that means that's enough for today. He makes Franco laugh. So Franco has like 300 pounds.
Yeah,
and
sitting on his chest.
Pushing that off as a warm-up weight, and he just drops it on his chest because he's laughing. Then Arnold supposedly has to assist him to get it back up, but he's like, he just sort of like, oh, he probably sees a girl or something. He's not paying attention. So you hear Franco yell at him, "You faule Schwein, you fucking pig." And then it's like, okay, he helps him up. And then they just laugh. They laugh like men. And it's just an amazing scene. But you see kind of like, Franco was never in any trouble. And he was controlling the situation because Arnold was, fucking off again. Yeah, but that's really the dynamic between the two. And it's very subtle. But you can tell Franco is really what holds Arnold together in many ways. Because Arnold came to the United States first. And the first thing he did was beg Joe Weider, bring over Franco. I need Franco. I need Franco. He whined for a year to get Franco. Because he knew, if I'm ever going to be Mr. Olympia, I'm going to need Franco as a training partner.
Wow.
Yeah. And when he made his comeback, which is a whole story in itself, in 1980, he was training for Conan because they were doing principal photography starting January 1981. So he had to get in shape. And so he was training. And when you get in shape and you get close to competition shape and everybody else is training and the Olympia's coming up, something in the back of your head is always going to say, hey, I could make my comeback. Because in the previous 5 years, that's all Arnold had been doing, talking about coming back, and that's what everybody was always, thinking about. So when is Arnold going to come back? Because major champion bodybuilders always return. Now, if you look at Reg Park returned, Bill Pearl returned, everybody makes a comeback after a few years to basically build on their legacy. Because the past Mr. Universes had to win again to prove they were as good as the guys in the past.
How much of it do you think it's to see if they still have it?
Exactly. Still have it, but also it's marketability. I mean, you make your money doing guest poses at seminars and selling yourself as an image, as a product. So you really don't want anyone else to usurp your position. So Arnold had to reestablish dominance in 1980. Did that in much the same way you see him do in Pumping Iron, with all that psyching. He drove his competitors crazy by alluding to that he might compete, might not compete. He wasn't sure. Well, we'll see, blah, blah, blah. So he had like this major competitor, Mike Menser, and he was driving Mike Menser crazy to the point where Menser was getting therapeutic help, was seeing a shrink because Arnold was messing with him every day in the gym. And then, of course, he was only supposed to be a judge at the competition. Menser complained about that. And then when they got to Australia, as it turns out, no, Arnold is entering the competition. And then he almost got into a fist fight with Arnold because during the athletes meeting, Arnold at some point just offhandedly remarked, well, you're not going to win anyway with a bloated stomach. And Menser just freaked out. I mean, he was so egged on by Arnold for months and months that everything just blew up. And in the end, he placed fourth.
It seems like Arnold
so psyched out.
Arnold wins the mental game 100 times out of 100. Yeah. That's crazy. There's
this famous story where Arnold, the lighting was really bad. And at the 1980 Olympia, Arnold was number 4, and he was in the wrong part of the stage. So Franco came on stage and warned Arnold, you're in bad lighting. You need to get on the other side. So Arnold, after hearing that, created a commotion, introduced Franco Colombo to the audience, and then just casually walked over to the best part of the stage where the lighting was the best.
Yeah.
That's Arnold. And he messed with everybody that day. I mean, he didn't completely succeed because part of the audience knew what was going on, and he got booed out of the building.
No.
But he won simply by force of will. And then he ended his career and sailed off into Conan the Barbarian. Then we had Arnold, the movie actor.
Well, you know what one of the things that I noticed about about the size difference in particular between him and a guy like Lou Ferrigno
Mhm.
is Lou is what 3-4 inches taller than Arnold.
It's almost a head taller. Lou is huge. I've met
Huge,
Lou
six
Ferrigno.
five.
He's enormous.
But Arnold, Arnold's charisma and Lou's maybe his introvertedness
Yeah, demeanor.
made Arnold seem so much bigger than Lou.
Yeah.
Even though by all
kind of the
intents
force
and
of will
purposes.
and the personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he dwarfed Lou just being the personality that he has,
Mhm.
And I actually, there were a few times in this because he's getting it from all angles, from his
Yeah,
father
you
and
feel
from
bad.
Arnold. I feel bad for the guy.
Yeah, because one of the tricks Arnold does in pumping iron, and you notice in the latter part of the movie, he talks constantly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And he does that because Lou is practically deaf.
Mhm.
Lou has 15% hearing. That's about it. So
Right.
he needs a hearing aid, and he doesn't have it. And he needs glasses, and he doesn't have it. So Arnold is yakking. So Lou is constantly has this information overload going on. He's trying to lip read, and he's trying to watch what's going on because he's threatened, because Arnold is his idol that he wants to beat. He's in this major competition. His dad is in one ear, Arnold is in his other ear. It was brutal.
Yeah, it's maybe the sensory overload kind of played into his withdrawal that he shows.
Definitely.
But yeah, I mean, you feel bad for the guy because a lot of times, like his quiet demeanor is him just like kind of looking around, taking in all the information. I'm sure part of it has to do with the lip reading and not being able to hear what's going on. But just he reminded me of like a child who doesn't know anybody.
His competition.
Who doesn't know anybody at the party. He's kind of just sitting off by himself.
And because silence can be your strength. For example, Frank Zane is a very quiet guy, well-spoken, a gentleman. He would always do his own thing. Whereas Arnold would get into the mix, Frank Zane would just go on another part of the stage and just do his own thing. And in that way, he came across as the winner. Same with Dorian Yates. Dorian Yates is another quiet guy who you would not see the entire year. He would just train in some dungeon somewhere in this some hellhole in Britain somewhere. They called him the Shadow. And then when it was Olympia time, he would just show up and he would be monstrous. And everybody in California would be training with each other and competing with each other in the gym. And then Dorian Yates would just show up and dwarf everybody. And that works as well. But those guys Lou never had that knack.
And you mentioned Dorian Yates and guys like him and Jay Cutler. They don't strike me as like the Arnold Lou Ferrigno style. Like they're so much more huge, it seems like.
Yes, but they're from a different age, really. You can delineate the ages in bodybuilding in terms of what drugs are prevalent. Whereas in the 50s, you just had your basic testosterones, that the Russians had. And in the 60s and 70s, the more refined stuff would come up. The stuff that Arnold got in Germany, because there's big pharmaceutical companies there, and he could get his hands on really high quality stuff. And that's what he brought to the United States. Those treatments used for burn victims. And in the 80s, that's when human growth hormone came up. That's when people started experimenting with insulin. Human growth hormone, steroid insulin age, that is Dorian Yates. That's where those bloated stomachs come from.
Yeah. And that's when there's abs, but their stomachs are really distended.
Yeah, because everything is growing. It's not just the muscle, everything, organs, everything.
Right.
That's the thing when people talk about talent in bodybuilding. They always talk about, good basic structure for symmetry, good proportion, low muscle insertions, big muscle bellies. But the one thing nobody ever talks about, the true talent in bodybuilding, and that's one of the things why I stayed natural, was the true talent in bodybuilding is how much drugs can you deal with? How much can you take before your organs start to fail, before your kidneys give out, before your heart has problems? And that's, in the end, that's what necked Arnold, because
they
he
were also
needed open heart surgery,
Mhm. But
right?
they were also doing like dangerous fat quantities in their diets too, and like
Sure.
really low carbs, but super high fat content, and
Yeah, the high
protein,
fat diet.
obviously.
Sure.
High fats and like low carbs
Yeah.
and 12 eggs for breakfast and steak, and
Tuna, fish, and
cottage
water.
cheese. Yeah, yeah.
I was on a
Yeah.
tuna, fish, and water diet, actually, out of necessity. I remember I was a kid. I was close to 19, close to 20. I got certified for a personal trainer course
Mhm.
with Fred Hatfield in Connecticut. So I was in the United States, and I'd spent most of my money getting to the United States. So all I had was basically my student loan that I was living on. So I hitchhiked across the United States, and I'd get on a Greyhound. There was a night bus, so I could get to the next city and sleep on the bus. And then the next day I would just drink a lot of water and buy tuna cans, because I could either afford the bus or I could afford food. That's how much money I had.
Uh-huh.
So I got across the United States, mostly hitchhiking, taking buses, getting to a gym, talking to gym owner into, hey, I just got certified as a personal trainer. If you let me train here for a couple of days, I can train all your clients for free. And half the time they would take me up on it. So that's how I got through, because I wanted to compete at the end of the trip. So I was dieting, training, and trying to get further into the United States. So I went all across the country, all the way to California. I did that on tuna, fish, and water, which is not a good diet, I can tell you.
But, well, that was the Stallone diet in Rocky 3 when he trimmed down to 3% body fat. He was eating a can of tuna and an apple a day. That's it.
Right. And lots of growth hormone.
Oh, yeah.
And he called them amino acids, the liar. Anywho,
but yeah, we kind of sidetracked a little bit. But
yeah, well, no, the interesting thing about pumping iron is it shows everything. I mean, you see Lou Ferrigno take Dianabol.
Mm-hmm.
The first scene you see Lou Ferrigno in, he's about to have breakfast, but before breakfast, he's shaking pills out of a so-called supplement bottle. Those aren't supplements. That's Dianabol. And everybody who's in bodybuilding knows that. Is like, oh yeah, because I've seen that stuff around.
Yeah.
And there's another scene where you see Arnold squat with Ed Corney, and you see
amazing
Ed Corney,
scene.
and all the scenes you see, they film from above. And there's one scene where you see Ed Corney from behind, and you see like this really weird stain on his shorts, and that stain is a blood stain from where he got injected.
Yeah.
And I've seen that around so many times. I've had training partners who were like on the gear. I could always tell. And they would tell me, no, I'm still natural. I'm yada, yada, yada. I was like, bullshit. Did you just get your period or something? Look at that. And they're like, oh shit, I'm bleeding again.
Yeah, I guess that's a telltale sign. I've never seen it in the wild, but I was never in the bodybuilding
yes,
scene.
But
like
if you're a bodybuilder, you're in the know, and you can just tell.
Yeah.
And it's like another interesting anecdote I heard about Arnold, and I actually managed to cross-check this. Several people talk about this on podcasts, and so sometimes Arnold would go to these bodybuilder parties, or they would just hang out at his place, and everybody would always be around. What are you using, Arnold? What kind of gear are you on? And he would just show them. It's like, oh, I'm using this. And so, do you want some? And so what he would do is just load up a syringe and just stay there and just bend over. And he would throw in the injection needle like a dart. It's insane. Jeez. But it's so Arnold. Because he's charismatic about the whole thing. He's friendly about the whole thing. And he's brutally cruel because he just throws that needle into you like a dart.
And apparently he seems to be transparent about it all too, because I mean, we all know that what these mega bodybuilders have done to their bodies. Like, everybody, they use drugs, they use steroids, but how many of them are like coy about it? Like, no, all natural. When you say bullshit, you're not natural. But those old school guys are just transparent about it.
Yeah. Back in the day, it wasn't a big deal.
They did what they had to do.
Yeah. Although, to a certain extent, of course. because and that's the same thing with all those guys I always had around me. It's like they would always say, yeah, no, I'm on drugs, yes, but it's a mature decision. It's something I weighed. And oh, really? You tell your grandmother? And they're like, they just get this weird look on their face. You tell your grandmother the truth when she asks you where your muscles came from? Look, right.
Yeah.
And even back in the day, that was no, I got all my muscles training hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all from an injection needle. Well, here's the thing. When you get that big, when you get Arnold big, it just goes with the territory.
Yeah, there's only so much protein somebody.
There's a human limit, and as a natural bodybuilder, I know that human limit because it's something you bump into. Try to push through every minute of every workout of every day. There's just a limit, and if you have less genetic talent, then not all your body parts are going to come up.
Right.
That's why in natural bodybuilding, you see guys with like really great body parts and some really disastrous ones. It's because, well, they don't have the pharmaceutical support to bring those body parts up. You just can't recuperate enough. Whereas guys who are on steroids they can just work on their weak points to the point of extreme overtraining and just bring them up. That's the whole trick to it. It's
not like slapping on some clay and sculpting it, right?
Nope. Well, if the clay is steroids, yes.
There you go. Bring it a full circle.
The interesting thing about Arnold, yes, he's big, but he was very, very talented. And there's another big guy in that movie, and that's Mike Katz. And Mike Katz he's huge, but he doesn't have Arnold's finesse. And
his story was interesting to me because he talked about a background of growing up as a Jewish kid in a non-Jewish school, and his way of exceeding in athletics was to show them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He became a football star. He became an NFL player. He became a bodybuilder, and it was all like, I mean, I guess at some point he shifted the focus to doing it for himself, but his reasoning for starting was to show them.
Yeah, he was bullied, and he has a great way of dealing with it. And he explains this. He has this beautiful philosophy about it. It's like, he compares himself to a dog, and he says you can kick a dog for so long, and he will either roll over and die, or he's going to bite you and attack you. And I'm the kind of a person who's the type of a dog who will bite back. And I think that's the best way of thinking about a situation like that. You have to overcome these things mentally and physically. And a lot of these people end up in bodybuilding because bodybuilding is mentally really tough. And they succeed in it because they have that kind of background. They want to be big because they felt threatened in their childhood, and they want to compensate.
Well, I can imagine it's mentally tough, and this is coming from a non-bodybuilder, but when we see the scene where he loses Mr. Universe to Ken Waller, right?
Yes.
And the disappointment on his face, it told the whole story. Like, he was happy for his countrymen, but he was also disappointed that, I mean, he didn't even crack the top 3. He came in at number 4 on that.
There's actually another story surrounding his entry, because he wasn't qualified. He wasn't qualified to go to the universe. In the IFBB at that point, you only had 3 classes. You had the short class, the medium class, and the tall class. And the short class entry was Danny Padilla. The medium class entry was Robbie Robinson. You see Robbie Robinson in the throwing around the football scene, where Ken Waller is explaining how he's going to take mentally tear down Mike Katz by taking anything he can find of his and hiding it, which is a scene they shot after Ken Waller, as a joke, hit Mike Katz's t-shirt. But there's a big thing, is that Ken Waller was qualified to compete. Mike Katz wasn't. And so they invited him. They just invited him. Then the competition came, and they said, at least Pumping Iron people said, look, we need Mike Katz in this competition because he's a big part of the documentary. No Mike Katz, no documentary. We need him in there. So what they did was they just disqualified Danny Padilla.
Oh, really?
They just disqualified him. Like, okay, you're not going. And he was there. He was about to step on stage. And he's like, what? So you see,
just for the sake of the documentary.
Exactly, and you see Danny Padilla in the scene where you see Franco in his prejudging comparisons, and they talk about him. It's like, look at his back and look how wide his back is, etc. He's like a bat. He could fly with those things. The guy who says, "Wow, he could fly with those things," that's Danny Padilla.
Oh,
and
he's like a younger guy that was talking
competition, and he tried to fix it himself by going to another team and saying, "Hey, you guys are a short guy." He went to, I think, Portugal, to the Portuguese team, and he kind of brokered a deal. It's like, look, I'll just come out for Portugal. And they said, oh, sure, fine. Because they didn't have a short guy. And here they're just, they get an American now, and Americans usually win. So he actually enters the competition. And then, of course, because it looks like he's about to win, all the other teams start complaining. And they have like this big meeting. And Danny Padilla is kicked out again.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He just couldn't catch a break.
It wasn't his year.
He could. And the worst part is, in the 1981 Mr. Olympia, he was the obvious winner. He was in such tremendous shape. It's just mind-boggling. And Franco Colombo won. And I think Danny would place 5th or something ridiculous. And again, he got screwed. It's just Danny just cannot catch a break.
How political is the bodybuilding competitions too? Because can you really pinpoint minute differences in one guy's physique compared to the other?
Well, yes, you can, but it's still comparing apples and oranges. But in bodybuilding terms, if you take the judging seriously, yes, you can. The reality of it, when things are so incredibly close, there is some wriggle room. Besides, it's a subjective sport. And in the end, it's the promoter really who decides who wins, because they're always going to pick the guy who's going to have the most support, who they're going to make the most money with.
Well, they have a whole year of Mr. Olympia sponsorships to trot out, right?
Right. And so you're going to pick the guy who's going to sell your magazines. You're going to pick the guy who's going to be in your ads. To a degree, part of being a Mr. Olympia is carrying the sport. And when you carry the sport, you carry that with you. Lee Haney got a lot of extra Mr. Olympias, even though he really didn't deserve them, simply because you don't want to rock the boat. Things are going well. We're getting more prize money every year. We're selling more magazines every year. We're getting a bigger audience every year. We're not going to rock the boat. No. We'll see. We'll see until the next big guy comes along. It's a big men's sport. We are introduced in the second half hour to Arnold, who explains how he got started, that he dreamed of, leaving Austria because, Austria is small and his home life was very uptight. And you see him in a photo shoot and all his dreams have come true. He's got a girl on every arm and he's the most powerful man in bodybuilding. And you really see the relationship Arnold has with Joe Weider when they're filming that ad, where you have Joe Weider directing how the girls are supposed to hug Arnold and how they're supposed to be. And there's a famous story where Joe Weider would send Arnold invoices for ads in his magazine, because Arnold had a mail order business and he would advertise in Joe Weider's magazines. So Weider would send him an invoice for that. So Arnold would just send back a bill for all the pictures Joe Weider took and used of him for the cover of his magazines, etc. And neither of them would ever pay. And the most powerful promoter in bodybuilding was beholden to the most powerful bodybuilder in bodybuilding, and they were codependent. And you see that in that scene. It's really, both men are at the top of their game, and Arnold is about to move out, and they need a new champion. And here was Lou Ferrigno on the horizon, but you still see Arnold really in his glory. I mean, he's doing seminars and you hear people asking him questions like, do you drink skim milk? And he's like, oh, no milk. No. Milk is for babies. When you grow up, you have to drink beer. That's as Arnold as you can get.
Yeah, it's classic. It's him ribbing the question asker. He answers without actually ever giving an answer. It's amazing.
Yeah, he's cruel to that person in a way, and he's also funny and he's charismatic. That's
Yeah,
Arnold.
I'm
And
glad
that's
they
every
showed
Arnold character in every movie.
those those photo shoot scenes and stuff, because you get a look into the I guess the dividends that come with putting your body through all the stress that he has and winning these competitions. This is how you get repaid in the end. Is, you get these photo shoots, you get surrounded in beautiful women, and it's just a way to market himself further into, and it got him a career in acting.
And at that point, Arnold was fixed and focused on becoming an actor. I mean, he dominated the bodybuilding scene for years now, and he was king of, when he guest posed at a competition, 300 people would scream his name. But here's a guy who had a bigger vision. And you hear him talking about it in a voiceover where he's like, yes, I was always dreaming about powerful people. And, I was dreaming about dictators and things like that, to like Jesus being for thousands of years remembered. In a way, you can say he achieved that very thing. He's really immortalized.
You can say Stallone kind of pioneered the action genre, but throughout the 80s, Arnold
the muscle in action genre. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was an action genre. You had Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, sure.
That you had Charles Bronson.
Charles Bronson.
I mean, and Steve Reeves, to a certain extent. Steve Reeves was the idol that Stallone emulated. Steve Reeves was in many ways a pre-Arnold. He was Mr. Universe, and then he played Hercules and a bunch of other movies. He made good money doing that.
Right. Yeah, but Arnold took something that somebody else pioneered and just owned it throughout the 80s. That's, which is going to be the kind of the point of this little abbreviated podcast we're doing. We're not doing we should let the listeners know, we're not doing a complete Arnold career breakdown. We're picking our favorites.
Yes, we're cherry picking. Definitely cherry picking.
Totally.
Well, here's the thing. Most podcasts are desperate to put out as much content as possible. I am more interested in really finding out why a certain artist is successful and why he may and how great his art is. Because when you look at painters, you don't look at every painting, you look at their best paintings. And it's the same with movies. It doesn't matter if a movie bombs or is just not as good. You don't have to pay attention to that. You pay attention to when he succeeds. So why would you look at, say, The Villain, which is a movie he did in 1978, 1979, that did nothing. It did nothing and it doesn't add anything, and it's boring to talk about. But when you talk about, and that's what we'll be covering, Conan the Barbarian, which is a milestone in his career. Now that's interesting to talk about because that's a true piece of art. Whereas The Villain is just something, well, okay, if you've seen it once, you want to forget about it as soon as possible.
And our buddy and podcaster on the feed, Sean Malloy, who does the I Must Break This podcast, he said that he does a Dolph Lundgren podcast, so he knows about bad films.
Oh, definitely.
Covering the bad films could be fun, which I agree they can be. I've done plenty of Stallone flops, and they are fun.
Oh, and I commiserate. I have listened to all of them.
Yeah, but for
I've
the sake of
groan on every one of them.
Yeah, but for what we're doing here,
we will not be groaning, my friend.
No, but for what we're doing here, we are taking the pinnacle, or what we think is the pinnacle. I mean, who knows? Somebody might hate Twins, but guess what? We love it, so we're going to cover it.
I don't think anybody hates Twins. How is that even possible?
I don't know. I was just picking something and throwing it out there.
You could hate Junior.
Oh my God, yeah.
And that's why we will be covering
We're
Twins,
not.
but we won't be covering Junior.
Right. And that's the perfect example.
Yeah. Anyway, so you see Arnold, the king of bodybuilding, posing on Muscle Rock. And that's actually a really cool scene. I watched all the outtakes because there's actually another documentary on pumping iron called Raw Iron, and where you all see all these deleted scenes because they shot like thousands of hours of this stuff. I mean, I think they shot for like almost close to a year. And so there's actually a scene where they all pose, the entire Gold's Gym group, all of them pose on that mountain, but they chose for the movie, they chose Arnold posing because basically Arnold is the king. He's the golden lion, which makes, in pumping iron terms, makes a lot more sense. But it is fun if you love pumping iron to watch the outtake documentary with all the extra stuff, because there's some gold there.
You know, there was something else I wanted to ask you about. Pretty much all of the training scenes that we see, like Arnold and the other bodybuilders do when they're actually lifting weights, they do it barefoot. Was that a typical thing back then? Is
Maybe
it
they didn't
a typical
afford
thing
shoes
now? I don't know.
I think the
You don't see
reality
people.
is that they had. I think Gold's Gym was carpeted. Gold's Gym was it's like a house, and I think they had a carpet. And I suspect Joe Gold just said, "Hey, leave your shoes outside." And everybody was just on flip flops, and they didn't want the flip flops in the gym. Also, it's uncomfortable to squat in flip flops, so you're basically squatting barefoot is more comfortable. Actually, I know guys who have like that special shoe where you have like it's kind of a sock with toes.
So yeah.
So you have better kinetic contact with the floor. Well, it's not my thing, but
I've taken my shoes off to deadlift sometimes. If I'm not, I'll usually squat or deadlift with Chuck Taylors because they have flat soles,
right?
So there's no cushion, no stress, extra stress on the knees. But I'll deadlift in socks, or I know some of the like the more serious, the Olympic style lifters, they use those shoes that lift their heel off the ground, so they have more quad activation.
Yeah, and you can push through your heel better, so you can activate your quads better.
Right.
And you're stronger that way. Because if you, in normal shoes, they tend to be more fixed around the balls of your feet. And that really, that destabilizes you in many ways, especially during squatting. So you really want to push through your heels.
And it puts more stress on the knee joint.
Yeah, but no, you see Arnold barefoot in pretty much every scene.
Yeah. Which
I'm sure Quentin Tarantino loves it.
Yeah. There's always a Quentin joke when you're talking about barefooted people.
Inevitably, he's the foot fetish guy.
That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the leaked foot fetish video off of Epstein's Island that inevitably we will see of Quentin Tarantino at some point.
God, let's hope not. I have too much respect for Quentin to see something like that surface. Well,
here's the thing with entertainers. They're people, and they're people who get too much money for what they're doing, and they're people who get too much attention for what they're doing. So inevitably, they will do something you will not enjoy. And I think you just have to appreciate the artist for the art. I mean, I'm doing the Mel Gibson podcast, and I appreciate Mel Gibson for the art he produced. But the person Mel Gibson, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and to a degree, that goes for Arnold as well. I mean, Arnold is. Yeah, what can we say about Arnold, right? I mean, here's Arnold, the champion bodybuilder, Arnold, the box office star, and then Arnold goes into politics, and the politics thing, it sort of rubbed me the wrong way.
And he cheats on his wife with the housemaid.
Well, that's Arnold. I mean, he cheated on women throughout his life.
I bet that was a big news maker for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason, somebody thought that was, maybe because he cheated on a Kennedy.
Oh, yeah.
Why would you cheat on a Kennedy?
Right.
Whereas, I've read Arnold's book by his first girlfriend, Barbara Outland, and he would cheat on her all the time. They would break up and they would get back together, and they would break up because he cheated again, etc. So now Arnold is a product of the 60s and 70s. I don't think he has, how should I say that? A loyal bone in his body, except to his friends.
No, I believe it.
And he's a politician.
It's Hollywood.
I don't think if you're in politics, you can have loyalties to anyone. You have to be as ruthless as you can.
All right, loyalties and honesty, that and politics don't go hand in hand.
No. Well, and whether Arnold succeeded in politics or not is another podcast. Basically, somewhere in the middle 90s, you could tell he was kind of ramping up to become a politician, because he became the presidential chairman for fitness and health in the United States under Bush. And he started kind of like moving his way into the political arena. And that's kind of when I sort of checked out on him, because physically he was also deteriorating. It was close to his open heart surgery. And after his open heart surgery, he was never the same again. What I always say people is like, yes, he had open heart surgery and an alien came to Earth and replaced Arnold. And that's why he looks like a used condom now instead of the champion bodybuilder we are used to seeing.
I know. I get it that age, catches up with everybody, but
yeah, but it's not really true, because he has contemporaries and they all stayed in shape. I mean, Frank Zane is in shape to this very day.
Mm-hmm. Even Lou Ferrigno is in great shape now.
Lou Ferrigno is in great shape to this very day. So there's really no reason why he should look like a used condom.
Right. Yet here we are.
Also, he put out the 25th anniversary of Pumping Iron because he bought the rights. And that's why we got the added documentary. And I think the reason he put out the documentary was for political reasons, because he needed to retcon a lot of stuff he said in that documentary. For example, he smoked dope in that documentary. He was catching flack for it. So he just turned that into a joke. It's like, oh yeah, did I smoke? Did I inhale? Etc. And there's a lot of stuff. I mean, he in the movie, he really comes off as superficial and in denial, callous and cruel. He says in the documentary, he just hammed that up because he needed to be the bad guy in the movie because Lou Ferrigno needed to be the good guy.
Sure, yeah.
And that was just retconning, because I don't think that really happened. I don't think at some point George Butler had a conversation with, listen, Arnold, we know we build you as the hero, but really we need you to be more of a bad guy here because Lou Ferrigno is a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more an underdog than we thought he was, etc. I don't think because that's what they say in that 25th anniversary documentary. I don't believe a word of it. And
we
a
also
lot of
know
stuff
that
he says, no, doesn't jive.
It was some of the, and I know you plan on talking about this anyway, but some of the information that he gives us in the movie isn't true anyway. Like the story about his father's funeral, right?
Yes, and that is true. And he retcons it in the Raw Iron documentary, saying, no, that was just a story I heard from some other bodybuilder, and I used it to, come off as this machine-like perfect bodybuilder. No, it's very simple. He couldn't go to the funeral, and he also couldn't go to the funeral of his brother. His older brother died in a car accident, and he actually heard too late, because Arnold came back and Franco didn't want to tell him over the phone. So he waited until he got back to California and then said, well, I'll tell you after dinner. And finally after dinner, Arnold said, what the fuck's going on? And he said, well, your brother died. And he said, why didn't you tell me? So he calls his mom. And at that point, there's already a funeral. It's too late to go.
What can you do?
But in the thing with his father, his leg was in a cast. He was in South Africa, and he'd had an accident on stage. There was no staging. So thinking, well, I'm a construction worker, I'm a carpenter, I'm going to build my own stage. So he built his own stage. That thing collapsed under him, and he ended up with his entire body collapsing on it. Yeah. So he really tore the ligaments in his knee. So he was in a full leg cast. So there was no way he could go home to Austria for the funeral. So there's no way he could go.
Right.
So in essence, he probably would have gone if he'd had the opportunity, but he didn't have the opportunity. And it just sounded cool to say in the documentary, because he's basically just building up his persona as like the perfect bodybuilder who is untouchable, both physically and mentally.
And it shows his dedication to the sport and what these bodybuilders sacrifice in order to achieve greatness.
Yeah. And probably when he was in the race for governor, his advisors probably said, look, you're going to have to go back on that documentary and sort of show some growth there.
Right.
But a lot of stuff he says in the original Pumping Iron is just Arnold, unfiltered, because they shot thousands of hours. Mm-hmm. So they just picked all the good stuff. He probably said stuff that was even crazier, but that didn't make any sense. You see the competition in Pretoria, South Africa. That's a crazy thing in itself. because that's the first time an international competition was even held in South Africa. It probably held there because Reg Park lived there and probably helped organize it.
Well, 70s was the height of South African apartheid, and you're talking about bringing a integrated population to South Africa to compete.
Yes, and amazingly, they allowed it.
Yeah.
And this country was like racist and was strictly segregational. There was true apartheid there. It's like you had white people and then you had the rest of the country. We're talking police state where you could only enter the white zones with a pass and only during certain hours. And then you'd have to make yourself scarce again and go back to your homeland, before a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you would just be picked up and arrested and interrogated, etc. I mean, you don't have to look far in terms of South African history to find really nasty examples. There was a civil war going on. South Africa was in a war in Angola, partially with the ANC and with other communist elements. In this mix, there's an international bodybuilding competition with a ton of Black people, which I thought was just amazing. And when I saw this as a kid, because I was watching a lot of Ali fights, and that was just par for the course for me. I never really thought much about it.
Right.
But on the other hand, we did see a lot of stuff in the news about South Africa where all these things were happening, all these riots and people getting shot and bombings. And so it's very interesting because you have this there's an unexpected entry, Serge Nubret. Well, he's an unexpected entry because they didn't think he could compete because he's Black.
Yeah, right. So they weren't even sure if he was going to be able to get into the country.
All the bodybuilders had a guest posing seminar in France, and they picked up Serge Nubret there. And they said, why don't you compete? Because he was probably competing there. Why don't you compete? And I was like, okay. So he came along. And then they got to South Africa and it was like, well, we're not really sure if we're going to get permission, yada, yada. So they were basically stringing along Serge Nubret. And Serge said, well, that killed my shape because I was in perfect shape for the competition. Then the day before they said, no, you can't compete. So I got really depressed and I started eating ice cream and what you do. He lost a percentage of his shape. And then the morning of, they said, oh, no, it's fine. You can compete. Everybody can compete. We're good. Albert Beckles can compete. Everybody can compete. Everything was honky-dory. So that Serge blames it on that. Arnold has a different story because Arnold always said that Serge was completely unbeatable when he's standing by himself and standing relaxed. And if you look at pictures of him, man, he's amazing. That perfect chest, those incredible abs, those wonderful arms. And he says, and then people would ask, well, what happens then? It's like, then he starts to pose and then he loses. And that's Arnold.
You do a great Arnold, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So here you have Louis, who had placed second the year before. Now he's got his father in his ear. And here's the thing. Matty Ferrigno was never Lou's coach. It's suggested in Pumping Iron.
Right.
He was never Lou's coach. That was just for the movie. And all the stuff they shot in like 3 days. Matty Ferrigno is a big part of that documentary, but a really small part of Lou Ferrigno's career.
Right. And this is technically a documentary, but it's a somewhat scripted documentary because all of his stuff, like you said, he didn't have any real hand in training Lou.
He's contrived. It's all contrived.
Yeah. We're supposed to believe that he was Lou's coach, Lou's trainer.
And I think the sad part about that situation is, despite it all being contrived, I think Matt Ferrigno, he started believing it. He says we a lot. There's no we, there's Louis. Louis is competing. Louis is on stage. Louis is flexing. Louis is training. You're handing him a dumbbell. Right? But here he is in the gym explaining posing to a 2-time Mr. America and a 2-time Mr. Universe. Like, yes, you have to tilt your body, this and that. He kind of sounds like Joe Weider.
Oh,
it's ridiculous. It's like, what are you even saying? But
do as I say. Yeah, he could or insists on telling you how to do it, even though he can't do it himself.
Yeah, and you can see this thing just unfolding. Here's this overbearing father, this football coach father, and here's like the beaten down son who's just trying to please everybody.
Right.
Yeah, and that kind of the dynamic that we see happening with during the competition, when you see Lou, he's just subdued in many ways.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying before about him, kind of just quiet there in the corner, not knowing anybody at the party, just sitting there minding his own business. But those scenes were with his father too were some of the scenes that I felt bad for him, because you got his dad berating him and telling him what to do, and Lou's, I think he's pretty capable to do it on his own.
Lou built himself up out of nothing with a weight set in the basement, and he became, like, at that time in the 70s, the biggest bodybuilder ever. That's quite a feat. I mean, look at the things he had to overcome to accomplish all this. So given a few years, I think he would have been fine. Then the Hulk happened for him.
Yeah, he turned out okay.
Lou Ferrigno is frustrated about his bodybuilding career. I mean, he did make a comeback in the early 90s that, to all intents and purposes, failed. We could go into detail, but why bother? I mean, Lou Ferrigno had a charmed television career. He was at one point, he was more successful than Arnold. I mean, between 1977 and 1982, Lou Ferrigno was a household name, and nobody had a clue who Arnold was. So in many ways, Lou's fine.
Yeah,
he's the Hulk.
Nobody's weeping for Lou. He is the Hulk. Lou Ferrigno and the Incredible Hulk,
greatest Hulk
are
ever.
Synonymous. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because everyone since then is CGI.
Mm-hmm. He was the real deal.
The Hulk in the early Marvels is Lee Priest, and Lee Priest is 5'8". He's not really the Hulk.
No, 6'5"
in CGI terms.
6'5", 275. That's a Hulk.
The Hulk.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And then he went on to in a recurring spot on King of Queens, which is a show that I love, and I love Lou's character on it.
Yeah, he plays himself.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cameo. Yes, and it's built up that he's going to outpsych Lou Ferrigno, and when you really look at Pumping Iron, what you can just see is how fond Arnold is of Louis, and how much he takes it easy on him. I mean, he teases him, but it's never really that cruel. He's not as bad as he is to other people. He's not bringing up any deafness. And that's his absolute weakness. And that's what Arnold does. He finds your absolute weakness, because he's a very shrewd man and he is a great judge of character. And he just sees your immediate weakness, and he punctures it. And, that's what he does with Serge Nubret. It's like Serge Nubret is just watching him, and he's watching him. Oh, you better keep looking.
Yeah.
That's all he needed to say. That was it.
If you want to really cut your competition down, you exploit their weaknesses. And you're right. He didn't go after Lou for that. And
Arnold is all over that competition from the moment he steps foot in the country until the moment he's saying goodbye to the fans. I mean, he goes on stage for the finals, and you hear, I think it's Ben Weider who says that. He says to Franco, "Give him hell." And Arnold just reacts immediately establishing dominance, because he can't have that right before he goes on stage. Like, there's that noise again. That little guy is talking too loud, and Franco's laughing. And that's immediately puts everybody back into the pecking order. And then he goes on stage and wins.
Without even batting an eye.
Not batting an eye, because he was so far ahead of everyone else, at least in 1975. Different story in 1980, but in 1975, it was effortless.
To see his, like, we've seen him in the movies that we see him in. He'll flex a bicep, you know what I mean? He'll wear a tight fitting shirt, but to actually see him on stage doing his poses, it was, this is a very homoerotic podcast as it is. But I was in awe of that guy's body. Just in awe. Everybody
is, because you can see he's the most perfectly developed human being on the planet. You can just see, it's obvious. And there are men who are bigger, like Lou Ferrigno, and men who are of equal size, like Mike Katz. But there's something different about Arnold. And that's because, like Arnold says, everything fits together. He
Yeah,
can't just increase it, like he says in the movie. He can't just increase his arms a half inch, because then everything has to increase or decrease. And
and the
perfection.
separation of the muscle groups, like you can almost see the insertion points of each individual muscle fiber is amazing.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
Arnold had true finish.
Mm-hmm.
It's a masterpiece. His work of art was done.
Right.
And in many ways, the movie Pumping Iron celebrates that, builds on the legacy of Arnold as the most perfectly developed human being on the planet.
I mean, he showcased it for sure.
And he built a career out of that. And that's what we will be exploring in the podcasts to come, because the next episode, I think, will be Conan the Barbarian.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. You didn't even seem sure that you wanted to do Pumping Iron, but
yeah, in retrospect, I realize how important
we have to just giant hunk of meat came from.
You don't understand Arnold unless you understand the bodybuilder Arnold, because the bodybuilder in Arnold has never left him. And Arnold was already a politician in bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, because of his charisma and in the way he psyched out his other competitors, he was also an actor. He was pretending to be something he was not, which is what an adult pretender does.
Let's take the Terminator, for example. The Terminator is a machine, but he has to act machine-like. And, we could probably pinpoint like where his bodybuilding posing helped him perform like a machine. We can explore stuff like that.
Absolutely. Arnold obviously has a mean streak. My question would be, is it a detriment to his acting career or an actual boon?
Well, it appears, and now I don't know anything about acting or Hollywood itself, but Hollywood strikes me as a kill or be killed kind of town. You know what I mean? If you want to succeed, you have to be abrasive. You have to assert yourself. You have to be a larger than life presence. You can't be Lou Ferrigno, timid, sitting in the corner, which, I mean, he made his own mark in Hollywood himself, but I mean, not to the scope that Arnold did. Arnold, I think his abrasiveness definitely helped him launch his career.
Well, there is a famous story about when he was trying to get his first role, and when he went up for Conan. Mm-hmm. Conan was produced by Dino De Laurentiis, and so his agent finally got him a meeting with Dino, and apparently he ruined the meeting because Arnold was in his glory. So as soon as he entered the room, he starts to, piss on everything. He starts to assert his dominance. So apparently what he said to Dino De Laurentiis, who's a man of fairly small stature, he said, "Hey, what's a little guy like you doing behind a big desk like this?" And apparently Dino freaked out and kicked him out. And his agent was really pissed because he said, "That was the shortest meeting I have ever had. Don't ever do this again. Next time we get into it, if I ever get you a meeting again, you say the exact opposite, because this might have killed your career."
Yeah, you praise the guy that's going to call the shots, right?
Not Arnold.
But you could see him. Can you see him saying exactly that, walking into a meeting and saying that?
I can definitely hear Arnold saying it. And
from what I've learned from watching Pumping Iron, I could totally see him saying it.
Yeah, and I think it was a big learning experience for him, that he was getting into a new arena. He was no longer the king.
Right.
He became the king again because he conquered the action hero field. I mean, at his height, which I think is around Terminator 2, he was outscoring Stallone. Mm-hmm. Because Stallone was completely psyched out by Arnold by that time, which is something we will get into. How did Arnold use his psyching techniques he honed in bodybuilding? How did he use it on his competitors? How did he use it in his movie career? Did that mean streak help him? I think it did to a large degree. And also his charisma, of course, because Arnold is a true salesman. And if anything, he sold every movie he was ever in.
Yeah, he was definitely the face of a lot.
there's a real point to be made that people like Stallone and people like Schwarzenegger had a big hand in getting guys like us in the gym.
Yeah, I would say it was more of, the Arnold as a character than Pumping Iron itself, because I mean, with or without Pumping Iron, Arnold was a face of bodybuilding. Maybe Pumping Iron brought bodybuilding to the forefront, collectively. But I think as far as the weight boom or the weightlifting boom of the 80s, you're right. I would suggest it was Arnold himself, guys like
Yes.
Stallone. And,
More so than Stallone, I think, because
yeah.
I've always marveled at the odd training techniques he uses. I mean, he was trained by Franco Colombo.
Mhm.
So you would think Stallone would be more traditional, but he isn't. He has a Stallone way of doing things.
Yeah, I'm sure he took tips from Franco and kind of made them his own.
Yeah, you could say that, and injured himself.
Yeah. Yeah. Stallone was shredded, but Arnold was big.
Yeah,
there was a clear
talent.
difference between the two of them.
Genetic talent, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Stallone doesn't have the genes for it.
No,
his injury didn't help. If you rip your pec off to the point where you rip off the tendon in your upper arm, nobody comes back from that.
That can't feel good.
No, and well, in terms of, I mean, they had to put in a steel cable to replace the tendon, so he could have function in his arm again. So that's why Rocky had to fight right-handed.
Yeah. Yep. What a gimmick.
Well, it actually made the movie more interesting.
Yeah, it was a plot point for sure.
Yeah.
Stallone's good for that, for like writing around issues. And this isn't a Stallone podcast, however.
No, but you're a Stallone guy. So, and inevitably we are going to be comparing the two because they will be neck and neck in the 80s. Arnold is looking to overturn Stallone. Stallone is the top guy. Stallone is the guy on top of the mountain, and Arnold wants to be king.
Right.
So it's all about, how do I get past Stallone?
Stallone was bona fide at the time Arnold was just starting.
Funny part was that when Rocky came out, Arnold came out with Stay Hungry, and Arnold got the Golden Globe for Stay Hungry. And Stallone Rocky got Best Picture. So they were at the same award show. They had to really they came out of the gate at exactly the same time.
Imagine that.
Yes, and it's very interesting to see to compare the two.
Yeah, the ebbs and flows of each career.
Yes, and in many ways, Arnold was the smarter one, and Arnold made the better decisions.
I totally agree.
Yeah, that's something Craig Cohen pointed out in your on your Stallone podcast, the group podcast you do, is that Arnold made the tactically smarter decisions. And to an extent, Stallone made the wrong ones because Arnold goaded him into it.
Yeah, we'll get there, but
we'll get there.
There's one example for sure that was a total troll on Arnold's part.
So that's Pumping Iron wrapped up, our first ever episode.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing this idea up to me, and I'm glad to be part of it, because I mean, I'm a Stallone fan. As much of a Stallone guy as I am, I'm also a total Arnold guy. I loved his stuff growing up throughout the 80s. Loved watching. I watched all of his action stuff, ate it up.
So am I.
I'm happy to be doing it.
I'm perfectly content to be a fan of both. I don't think there's a contention there.
Right. And one goes hand in hand with the other. It's
Yeah, now they're both expendable.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess stand by for Conan the Barbarian coming right at you.
Our next summer blockbuster.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
So am I. Bye for now.
All right.